Also tonight, the Alex Murdaugh trial continues in South Carolina. He testified in his own defense. He's accused of killing his wife and son in 2021.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
June 7, 2021. A seemingly peaceful night in the heart of Hampton County, South Carolina. The quiet, rolling fields stretch far and wide under the darkening sky, a picture of rural luxury. The estate, a sprawling property filled with the wealth and legacy of the Murdaugh family, stands tall against the southern landscape, a symbol of power, prestige, and untouchable influence. But on this night, beneath the surface of privilege and perfection, something horrific was unfolding. At 10:07 p.m., a 911 call shatters the silence. The voice on the other end is frantic. Alex Murdaugh, the patriarch of the family, reports finding his wife, Maggie, and their 22-year-old son, Paul, lifeless, shot to death just steps away from the home they once called safe. The crime scene, a luxurious estate, untouched by time, yet filled with bloodshed. The brutality of it sends shockwaves through the community, through the entire state, and beyond. In the hours that follow, authorities are left with more questions than answers. There are no signs of forced entry. No apparent motive. Just the cold, stark reality of a family torn apart. The Murdaugh family, once an unshakable dynasty, now stood at the center of a dark, unraveling mystery. But this wasn't just any ordinary crime. No, this was the murder of two members of a family whose name carried weight. Whose influence was undeniable. For decades, the Murdaughs had been the backbone of the region's justice system, controlling the courts, shaping laws, and holding power like few others in South Carolina. They were untouchable. Or so they thought. Behind closed doors, however, something much darker had been festering. Secrets, lies, and betrayal, all hidden under the polished surface of their public image. The questions only grow as the investigation deepens. Was this crime the result of a personal vendetta? Or was it a desperate act to protect a family built on corruption? Who did this? Why? And what role did their power and privilege play in the tragic deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh? The deeper we go into the Murdaugh family's past, the more disturbing the story becomes. What seemed like an isolated act of violence soon revealed itself to be just the tip of the iceberg, a family dynasty poised to crumble under the weight of its own secrets. Join us as we uncover the clues, revisit the forgotten evidence, and peel back the layers of deception in this chilling case. The legacy of the Murdaugh family, once a symbol of control, now threatens to expose everything they've worked to hide. It's a story about power, greed, and the lengths someone will go to protect it, even if it means taking the lives of those closest to them. Stay with us, as we unravel the web of lies that surrounds the Murdaugh family. The answers might not be what you expect. For over a century, the Murdaugh family's name had echoed through the legal and political halls of South Carolina, a dynasty built on power, respect, and influence. Their story isn't just one of affluence, it's the story of a family that had managed to weave its presence into the very fabric of the state, shaping decisions that affected everyone around them. It all began with Randolph Murdaugh, the patriarch, a respected solicitor who served the 14th Judicial Circuit for decades. His career cemented his place as a figure of authority, a man whose word carried weight, whose decisions were rarely questioned. Randolph's legacy laid the foundation for what would become one of the most influential legal families in the South. In the world of law and politics, the Murdaughs were untouchable. Their power extended far beyond the courtroom, into every corner of the local government, weaving an intricate web of influence that seemed impenetrable. Randolph's son, Alex Murdaugh, continued the family's rise to prominence. He followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a well-known and successful lawyer in his own right, with a career that spanned over 20 years. Alex, however, wasn't just a legal mind, he was a symbol of the Murdaugh dynasty itself. His vast network of connections, his influence over the courts, and his powerful presence in local politics made him a figure to be admired, feared, and respected. But as with many families that rise to such heights, there was a cost. The Murdaugh family estate, a sprawling property nestled in the heart of Hampton County, was the physical embodiment of their power. Situated in the rural, picturesque lowcountry of South Carolina, the estate was a sprawling landscape of manicured lawns, expansive forests, and towering homes that spoke volumes about the wealth the family had accumulated over generations. The main house, a grand, southern mansion, stood as a testament to their success. Tall columns, sweeping verandas, and windows that overlooked the land they had come to own, it was more than just a home. It was a symbol of control, of a family that had everything. The Murdaugh name, once synonymous with justice, wealth, and influence, was revered by many in the region. To be a Murdaugh in this part of the world meant you had arrived, and the expectations placed on the family were equally lofty. They were the judges, the lawyers, the men and women who made things happen in South Carolina. The estate itself was like a fortress, guarded not just by security measures but by the power of the family's name and legacy. It was a place where the Murdaughs were untouchable, a symbol of their unassailable position in society. But as the world would soon discover, there was more to this family than just the image they projected. The dichotomy between the public face of the Murdaugh family and the truth lurking beneath their polished veneer is where the story begins to take shape. The Murdaughs, to the outside world, were everything one would expect from a Southern dynasty. They were wealthy, respected, admired. They seemed to have the perfect family, a devoted husband, Alex, a wife, Maggie, and two sons, Buster and Paul, who lived in the shadows of their larger-than-life family name. They lived in a bubble of privilege, where life was about maintaining appearances, about keeping up the facade that everything was flawless. But for all their wealth and success, behind the closed doors of their mansion, the Murdaughs were a family with a tangled history of secrets and lies. For years, those secrets had been carefully guarded, wrapped up in layers of denial, control, and manipulation. The Murdaughs' public image was that of a Southern elite family. Alex, with his well-groomed persona, became a prominent figure in the legal community. He had the kind of life that many people envied, a successful career, a beautiful family, and a home that most could only dream of. But what the public didn't see, what the world didn't know, was the vast web of corruption that the Murdaugh family had spent years cultivating. Beneath the surface of their charming Southern hospitality and legal prowess was a darker undercurrent, one that would soon come crashing to the surface in the most shocking of ways. The contrast between the Murdaughs' public image and their private lives was stark. They had perfected the art of maintaining a pristine reputation, hiding their financial troubles, family conflicts, and darker dealings behind a veneer of Southern charm. To the outside world, they were the perfect family, but in reality, their home was a place where deception thrived. The pressure to maintain that image was enormous, and with it came a growing sense of entitlement. For years, they seemed above the law, using their influence to protect themselves from the consequences of their actions. Alex Murdaugh, in particular, had mastered the art of using his family's power to navigate legal loopholes and cover up mistakes. The world knew Alex as a lawyer, a man who fought for justice, but there were whispers, rumors of things hidden in the shadows. His family's wealth didn't come from just hard work, it came from a system of privilege, influence, and sometimes, questionable dealings. The Murdaugh family's control over the justice system in South Carolina was unparalleled. They knew the right people, had access to the right resources, and wielded their power like a weapon. But when the lives of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were taken, it was as if the very foundation of their legacy had been cracked. The family's wealth, influence, and connections could no longer protect them. The brutal killings of Maggie and Paul shattered the carefully constructed image of invincibility that had been built over generations. The family that had once been seen as above reproach was now under a microscope, and every hidden truth was beginning to surface. As investigators began their work, the cracks in the Murdaugh family's story grew wider. They quickly realized that this was no simple murder case. The Murdaughs' power and influence had allowed them to maintain a delicate balance, but the deaths of Maggie and Paul exposed just how fragile that balance truly was. What had started as a brutal, senseless crime would soon reveal itself to be a part of a much larger, much darker narrative. And as the layers of deception were peeled away, the shocking truth about the Murdaugh family began to emerge. The family's public image, built on years of legal expertise, wealth, and power, had been shattered. The Murdaughs, once untouchable, were now grappling with the consequences of their own actions. The estate, once a symbol of their success, now stood as a silent witness to their downfall. Their secrets, once hidden behind the gates of their mansion, were being exposed to the world. And in the wake of the murders of Maggie and Paul, it became clear that the Murdaugh's dynasty was about to face its greatest reckoning. The question on everyone's mind was no longer who killed Maggie and Paul, but who in the Murdaugh family had been hiding the truth for so long. The evening of June 7, 2021, was supposed to be like any other night on the Murdaugh family estate in Hampton County. The sprawling grounds, bathed in the fading light of a southern summer evening, seemed peaceful, almost idyllic. But inside the walls of the family's grand home, a tragedy was unfolding that would shock the world. At approximately 10 p.m., Alex Murdaugh made a desperate 911 call, his voice shaking with panic. He claimed to have discovered the bodies of his wife, Maggie, and their son, Paul, lying lifeless on the family's sprawling estate. The initial report from Alex was simple enough. He found Maggie and Paul near the dog kennels on the property, shot to death. The authorities, no doubt thinking they were about to investigate a heinous but straightforward double homicide, quickly mobilized. Law enforcement arrived on the scene in a matter of minutes, unsure of what they would find. What they encountered was a scene that didn't make sense, and as the investigation unfolded, their growing concerns only deepened. The Murdaugh estate, with its lush surroundings and opulent furnishings, seemed untouched, no signs of forced entry, no apparent robbery, and no immediate suspects. It was a house that screamed wealth and privilege, yet 2 bodies lay in the quiet of its darkened night. The question that lingered in the air: who could have committed such a brutal act inside this fortress of family legacy? As the police began to secure the area and process the scene, they quickly noticed something unusual. The timeline Alex had provided didn't quite match up with the physical evidence they were uncovering. For one, there were no signs of forced entry. No sign that anyone had broken into the estate or tried to steal anything. In fact, nothing appeared disturbed at all. The crime scene was strangely clean. The luxury vehicles parked outside, the expensive family belongings left untouched, all of it stood in stark contrast to the violence that had just been unleashed inside. It raised immediate doubts. If this had been a random act of violence, why wasn't anything taken? Why hadn't the house been ransacked? Something didn't feel right. As the night wore on and the initial shock wore off, investigators began to focus on Alex himself. His story, which initially seemed like the natural explanation for the events of that night, started to unravel under the pressure of their questioning. He told the police that he had been visiting his mother, who was reportedly sick and in need of care, at the time of the murders. His explanation seemed plausible at first, but the investigators quickly realized that his timeline didn't add up. In fact, it appeared that Alex was nowhere near his mother's home at the time he claimed. The key break in the case came from an unlikely source, Paul's phone. As investigators began to analyze the scene, they discovered a critical piece of evidence that would blow a hole in Alex's story. A video taken by Paul, just moments before his death, was discovered on the phone. In the video, Paul had captured a fleeting moment, a quick snapshot of his surroundings. But in that moment, what Alex had claimed was happening, that he was miles away visiting his sick mother, didn't hold up. The video, which had been recorded just minutes before the murders, clearly showed Alex on the property, near the dog kennels where Paul and Maggie were ultimately found. He was there. At the scene. This discovery was explosive. Alex's alibi, which had been the cornerstone of his explanation, had been completely shattered. He had lied. But why? What was the real story behind the deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh? And why did Alex feel the need to fabricate a story so quickly, as if the truth wasn't enough to explain the tragedy? As the investigation continued, a sense of mounting tension filled the air. Each new discovery seemed to deepen the mystery. Alex's initial narrative, his calm demeanor in the aftermath of such a horrific event, began to ring hollow. Law enforcement had already begun to question his credibility, but now, with concrete evidence contradicting his every word, the investigation had taken a drastic turn. What had started as a tragic but possibly isolated event was beginning to look like something far more sinister. The more investigators dug, the more they realized how little they truly knew about the Murdaugh family. Alex, once thought to be a victim in this tragedy, was quickly becoming the prime suspect. But how could someone so powerful, so well-connected, be involved in such a brutal act? What could have driven him to murder his own wife and son? Was it a crime of passion? A desperate act to cover up something far darker beneath the surface? Or was it something else entirely, something far more calculated, far more dangerous? The tension between Alex's story and the evidence continued to grow, and with each passing hour, the stakes climbed higher. Was this a case of a desperate man who had lost everything, willing to sacrifice the people closest to him to protect his own secrets? Or was there something more to the story? Investigators were left to piece together the crime scene and the growing trail of lies surrounding the Murdaugh family. The more they learned, the more the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit together in ways they hadn't expected. The Murdaughs were not just a family of legal power and wealth, they were a family with a history of questionable dealings, dangerous secrets, and a web of corruption that stretched back decades. But could they prove that Alex had orchestrated this tragedy? And if he had, what was the true motive behind the killings of his own wife and son? With every contradiction, every shred of new evidence, the stakes grew higher. And as the investigation unfolded, the authorities were forced to confront the chilling possibility that the Murdaugh family's perfect image, the one they had carefully crafted over generations, might have been nothing more than an elaborate lie. Would the truth finally come to light, or would the Murdaughs' legacy of power and secrecy shield them from the consequences of their actions? What happened on that warm June night? What led to the brutal deaths of Paul and Maggie Murdaugh? The answers were out there, but finding them would be more difficult than anyone could have imagined. As the investigation into the tragic deaths of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh progressed, law enforcement began to peel back the layers of the Murdaugh family's carefully constructed image. What seemed like an isolated crime soon became entangled in a much larger web of financial mismanagement, deceit, and legal maneuvering. Detectives turned their attention to Alex Murdaugh's finances, and what they found would forever alter the course of the investigation. The family, long known for their wealth and influence, had lived a life of opulence, but beneath that wealth was a history of questionable financial decisions. There were signs of extravagance, of lavish spending on things that couldn't be explained, and of money flowing in ways that didn't quite add up. Alex, it seemed, had been living a life far beyond his means, and the more investigators dug, the clearer it became that his personal finances were in far worse shape than anyone had known. There were stories of Alex's financial troubles dating back years. He had borrowed large sums of money, forged documents, and made deals that left him heavily indebted. His lifestyle, while outwardly impressive, was built on borrowed money, hidden assets, and a network of people who helped him cover up his tracks. But these financial secrets weren't the only things that began to unravel. As investigators continued to look into the Murdaugh family, they uncovered a troubling pattern of suspicious deaths linked to them. Several people with ties to the family had died under mysterious circumstances in recent years, including the death of their housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, who had allegedly tripped and fallen at the Murdaugh estate. At the time, her death seemed like an accident, but after Maggie and Paul's murders, questions began to surface. Gloria's family, who had received an insurance payout for her death, later realized that the money had never made it to them, it had been stolen by Alex, along with millions from his own law firm. As more red flags surfaced, the Murdaugh family's once untouchable reputation began to crumble. Investigators discovered missing funds, fraudulent insurance claims, and people who had been hurt by the family's actions. The Murdaughs, who had always been regarded as pillars of the community, were now seen as the masterminds behind a web of corruption that stretched back years. Every new discovery only raised more questions about the family's true nature and how far Alex Murdaugh would go to protect his secrets. The deeper investigators went, the more Alex's story began to fall apart. Initially, he had told a simple tale of finding his wife and son shot to death on their property, claiming he had been away visiting his sick mother. But as the investigation gained momentum, his explanations became more defensive and erratic. Alex started to shift between stories, offering up different versions of events as the pressure mounted. He told one investigator that he had been at the estate but was later seen on surveillance footage leaving his home in the middle of the night. His behavior grew increasingly erratic as more evidence mounted against him. The more investigators asked, the more Alex's answers seemed to shift. What was once a well-rehearsed story became riddled with inconsistencies. It was clear that he was trying to control the narrative, but with each new question, his grip on the truth seemed to slip further away. Amid all the chaos, key figures began to emerge: witnesses, law enforcement officers, and individuals close to the Murdaugh family, all of whom played pivotal roles in uncovering the truth. First came the investigators, who were determined to get to the bottom of the case despite the obstacles in their way. Special agents from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, SLED, were assigned to the case, working tirelessly to piece together the family's financial and personal history. Their expertise would soon prove crucial, as they uncovered evidence that linked Alex not just to the murders but to a much larger scheme of corruption and theft. Then there were the people closest to the Murdaughs, those who had worked with Alex, or had known the family for years. Some began to speak out, sharing stories of Alex's behavior that had been ignored for far too long. One of the first to break rank was a former law partner of Alex's, who revealed that Alex had been stealing money from his clients and the firm for years, hiding it in offshore accounts and using it to fund his lavish lifestyle. Others close to the family began to open up about the dark side of the Murdaugh name, how the family had always been untouchable, how they had manipulated the system for decades to protect their interests. Slowly, the truth began to emerge, and the cracks in the Murdaugh family's facade grew wider with every revelation.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.
With every piece of evidence uncovered, the truth became more and more undeniable. The Murdaughs, once seen as the perfect Southern family, were revealed to be living a life of lies, deceit, and corruption. And at the center of it all was Alex Murdaugh, a man whose life had been built on deception and who was now watching his empire collapse around him. The question was no longer whether Alex was involved in the murders of his wife and son, it was what else he had been hiding all along. As investigators delved deeper into the case, the question of why Alex Murdaugh would want to kill his own wife and son became more pressing. What could have driven a man with everything, wealth, power, a respected family name, to commit such a brutal act? At first, it seemed unimaginable that Alex, once a man known for his legal acumen and community involvement, could be responsible for such senseless violence. But as the investigation progressed, more clues began to emerge, and the picture of Alex's life grew darker. Was it financial desperation? Did Alex fear that his years of deceit, theft, and manipulation would finally come crashing down, and the murders were a last-ditch effort to protect his secrets? Or was there something more personal at play, a deeper family conflict that had been simmering for years? The financial collapse Alex had been trying to keep hidden was one of the key motivations behind the crime. As investigators uncovered his financial records, they were stunned by the sheer scale of his debts. Alex had been living far beyond his means for years, using his family's wealth and power to cover up financial mismanagement that spanned over a decade. Millions of dollars had been stolen from his law firm and clients, funneled into personal accounts and used to fund a lavish lifestyle that belied his rapidly deteriorating financial situation. Despite this, Alex continued to project an image of affluence and success, a man who was untouchable. But behind the facade, the walls were closing in. His opioid addiction, which he had managed to keep secret for years, only added to the pressure. The addiction, along with his spiraling finances, had made it nearly impossible for Alex to maintain the charade any longer. His lavish spending on expensive properties, boats, and vacations had only intensified the pressure to keep up appearances, and with the Murdaugh name starting to falter, the risk of exposure became too great. In a desperate attempt to silence the mounting financial disaster, it seemed Alex was willing to do anything to protect his secrets, even if it meant taking the lives of his closest family members. As the investigation revealed more about Alex's spiraling financial situation, a picture emerged of a man backed into a corner, trying to manipulate everyone and everything around him to avoid the consequences of his actions. Alex's initial narrative about the murders, that he had been away visiting his sick mother while Maggie and Paul were killed, began to look more like a calculated attempt to cover up the truth. Was it possible that Alex believed he could manipulate the legal system he had spent his entire career in to cover up his role in the deaths of his wife and son? Did he think that the influence and power of the Murdaugh family would shield him from the consequences? It's clear now that Alex's grasp on reality had begun to slip, and the cover-up was no longer just about the murder, it was about preserving the Murdaugh name at all costs. For years, the Murdaugh family had been untouchable, their name a shield that protected them from scrutiny and consequence. Their wealth and influence were woven into the fabric of the region's legal system, and it seemed like nothing could tarnish their legacy. The Murdaughs had been above reproach, using their political connections to safeguard their position. Alex's father, Randolph Murdaugh III, had been a powerful figure in the legal world, and Alex himself had followed in his footsteps, securing connections that stretched far and wide. But when the murders of Maggie and Paul came to light, it quickly became apparent that the very power and influence that had protected the Murdaugh family for generations were now being used to hinder justice. It wasn't just Alex who was implicated, the entire family's history of manipulation and cover-ups was now under the spotlight. Was the family's control over the legal system so vast that it had allowed them to get away with years of corruption, theft, and even death? As the investigation unfolded, the realization dawned that the Murdaughs' grip on power had allowed them to hide their secrets for far too long, but now the truth was slowly beginning to unravel. The Murdaugh family, once a symbol of control and power in South Carolina, was now a family on the brink of total collapse. The murder of Maggie and Paul Murdaugh had set in motion a chain of events that would expose the depths of Alex's deceit and bring down the powerful family name that had ruled the region for over a century. What began as a brutal crime soon became the key to unlocking years of hidden corruption, financial misdeeds, and collusion. And as the investigation continued, it became clear that the Murdaughs' legacy would be forever tarnished by the truth they had spent so long trying to bury. As the investigation continued, the truth about Maggie and Paul Murdaugh's deaths began to slowly emerge, piece by piece, through a series of forensic breakthroughs that shattered the carefully constructed narrative Alex had attempted to control. What started as a murky case clouded by inconsistencies and evasions was now beginning to take shape in ways that Alex had never anticipated. The turning point came when investigators turned to the digital evidence, cell phone records, social media activity, and surveillance footage, all of which would prove to be crucial in exposing the truth about what had really happened on that fateful night. The digital evidence was the first crack in Alex's alibi. Investigators combed through Paul's cell phone and uncovered key pieces of evidence that contradicted Alex's story. In one critical find, they discovered a video Paul had recorded just minutes before his death. The video, which was shot near the dog kennels on the Murdaugh estate, clearly showed Alex on the property, debunking his claim that he had been visiting his sick mother at the time of the murders. This discovery was a turning point. Alex's story, once considered a possible truth, now seemed like a calculated lie. As investigators dug deeper into the digital records, more evidence surfaced. Text messages, social media posts, and location data from phones all pointed to inconsistencies in Alex's statements. The technology that Alex had hoped would be his shield became the weapon that exposed his lies. Alongside the digital evidence, witness testimonies began to fill in the gaps in the case. Investigators spoke to people close to the Murdaughs, former associates, family friends, and even neighbors, who began to shed light on the family's complicated, and often secretive, relationships. Some witnesses spoke of Alex's erratic behavior in the days leading up to the murders, while others revealed disturbing details about the Murdaugh family's financial troubles and the tense dynamics between Alex and his wife. Disillusioned former colleagues at Alex's law firm testified about missing money, embezzlement, and Alex's sudden desperation to cover up his financial woes. These testimonies painted a picture of a man willing to do anything, even commit murder, to protect the life he had built on lies. The forensic breakthroughs and witness accounts led to a pivotal moment in the case: legal action. On July 14, 2022, Alex Murdaugh was indicted on 2 counts of murder. The walls were closing in, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. The story had gone from a tragic family loss to a full-scale criminal investigation into the darkest corners of Alex's life. As the case moved to the courtroom, the question on everyone's mind was no longer, did he do it, but, what else is there to uncover? Alex's trial would reveal not just the truth about the murders, but the extent of his lies, his manipulation, and the web of deceit that had held the Murdaugh family together, until it all came crashing down. The legal consequences for Alex Murdaugh came swiftly after his indictment in July 2022. With the weight of digital evidence, witness testimonies, and a shattered alibi, Alex stood accused of murdering his wife, Maggie, and their son, Paul. His trial began in January 2023, and what followed was a public spectacle that exposed the darkest corners of his life. The courtroom became a battleground, not just for justice for Maggie and Paul, but for the very soul of the Murdaugh family. Prosecutors presented a damning case, weaving together the financial collapse, Alex's shifting stories, and the irrefutable evidence that placed him at the scene of the crime. The details were chilling: Alex's financial struggles, the desperation to hide his deceit, and the coldness with which he had taken the lives of those closest to him. His once respected name, built on years of legal influence and Southern charm, now hung in the balance. The trial was a public spectacle, with every twist and turn laid bare for the world to see. In the end, the jury found Alex guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. But Alex's legal battles didn't end with his conviction. The murder charges were only the tip of the iceberg. The Murdaugh family's name, once synonymous with power and control, was now mired in scandal, and the fallout was far-reaching. In the wake of the murders, a flood of civil lawsuits followed. The Beach family, who had suffered the loss of their daughter Mallory in a 2019 boating accident involving Paul Murdaugh, filed a wrongful death lawsuit. Other victims, including Gloria Satterfield's family, who had been cheated out of millions in a botched insurance settlement, also pursued legal action against the Murdaugh estate. Each lawsuit uncovered new layers of corruption and deceit, further tarnishing the Murdaugh name and turning the once gilded family into a symbol of fraud and betrayal. As the lawsuits piled up, Alex's personal disgrace became a public spectacle. Once admired by many for his legal prowess and his place within South Carolina's elite circles, Alex was now a figure of shame. The family that had once commanded respect was now the subject of ridicule. The people who had once looked up to him, who had trusted him with their legal battles, now turned their backs on him. His name, so closely tied to power, had become synonymous with greed and murder. For Alex, the public disgrace was far more than just the loss of his reputation, it was the complete collapse of the life he had built. For the Murdaugh family, the emotional aftermath was devastating. Alex's surviving son, Buster, found himself in the unimaginable position of trying to rebuild a life after the tragedy that had struck his family. The Murdaugh name had once meant something, it had been a symbol of power, prestige, and influence. Now, it was a symbol of loss and betrayal. Buster, who had once lived in the shadow of his family's legacy, was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been shattered. The case had not only taken the lives of his mother and brother but had also taken away the identity of the family he had once known. For Buster, the emotional toll was immense. The weight of his family's downfall, the loss of his loved ones, and the public shame of their legacy had left him with nothing but a painful reminder of what had been lost. What remained of the Murdaugh family was a name tarnished beyond repair, a legacy forever changed, and a community left to grapple with the true cost of power and corruption. The Murdaugh case, with its shocking twists and revelations, has become much more than just a tragedy for one family, it has served as a lens through which we can examine deeper societal issues that continue to plague America. At the heart of the case lies the abuse of power and wealth, particularly the ways in which those with influence can manipulate the very system that is meant to uphold justice. The Murdaughs, with their decades of control over the legal and political system in South Carolina, epitomized the concept of untouchability. For years, their name was synonymous with justice, but as the case unfolded, it revealed the darker side of wealth and privilege, the ability to evade scrutiny and accountability, no matter the consequences. It's a story that shakes the public's perception of justice, especially in a region where connections and power have long determined who gets away with what. The Murdaughs were not just a family of wealth and influence, they were a legacy. The concept of legacy families, those whose power and reputation stretch across generations, plays a central role in this story. The Murdaugh name was a shield, protecting them from the consequences of their actions for years. But as the truth came to light, it became painfully clear that the system that had protected them had also allowed for corruption to flourish unchecked. This case forces us to question what happens when those at the top believe they are above the law, when power and privilege become the ultimate defense against justice. What is the cost when a family's legacy becomes a tool for exploitation rather than service? The public's fascination with the Murdaugh story was amplified by the media frenzy that followed. As more details emerged, the case quickly turned into a media spectacle, captivating audiences across the nation. The insatiable desire for scandal, corruption, and injustice drew people in, as the story seemed to touch on everything the public craved: power, wealth, betrayal, and a fall from grace. The Murdaughs, once the embodiment of Southern elitism, were now the focus of a nationwide spectacle that laid bare the systemic issues that permeate American society. At the core of the Murdaugh saga lies a broader philosophical question about justice, fairness, and accountability in a society where wealth and power often seem to shield the rich and influential from the consequences of their actions. When the law appears to favor the powerful, how do we ensure that justice truly serves everyone equally? This case is a painful reminder that the systems in place are often more about who you know than about what's right, a system that, in the eyes of many, needs to be reformed. The unraveling of the Murdaugh family has left a trail of devastation in its wake. 2 lives were tragically lost, Maggie and Paul, whose murders shocked the community and set off an investigation that would expose the darkest secrets of a once powerful family. The revelations that followed were staggering, as a long history of financial crimes, cover-ups, and corruption emerged. Alex Murdaugh, once a respected figure in South Carolina's legal community, found himself at the center of a storm that would dismantle everything he had built. The family's name, once synonymous with justice and power, was now a symbol of betrayal and deception. Reputations that had been carefully crafted over generations crumbled, and the consequences of their actions reached far beyond their own household. But even as the dust begins to settle, the Murdaugh saga is far from over. There are still unresolved deaths tied to the family, such as the mysterious death of housekeeper Gloria Satterfield, whose fall at the Murdaugh estate raised more questions than answers. The ongoing trials, the civil suits, and the continuing fallout from Alex's financial misdeeds keep the story alive, a story that may not have reached its final chapter. What will become of Alex Murdaugh, now convicted of double murder, and his surviving son, Buster? How will the legacy of a once feared family be remembered when the full truth is finally revealed? The Murdaugh family's grip on power has slipped away, but as the dust settles, the question remains: who else will fall in the shadows of their legacy? The true cost of their actions is far from clear, and the investigation is far from over. Stay tuned, as we continue to uncover the stories left behind by those who thought they were untouchable. The truth is still unfolding, and the answers may be more chilling than anyone could have anticipated.
Welcome to Shocking True Crime. Thanks to all our viewers and subscribers for your support. Stay with us for daily updates on the most shocking true crime stories. Don't forget to subscribe.